Welcome to All Thing Considered, a conversation on life and faith in heathenry, Ásatrú, and Norse paganism from the Troth, education and service for inclusive heathenry.
Hey everybody, good evening, and thanks for joining us for All Thing Considered. Tonight we're going to have a topic on kids in the Ásatrú community, and we're going to be going through all kinds of topics about how we make kid-friendly events, how we are good support people to the parents in our lives and to the kids in our lives, and just bringing together and bringing to a close this really wonderful month that we've been having of family-oriented kind of content. You can go back through each episode's just a slightly different angle on this topic. And before I bring Piper on, who's a wonderful guest for today, I just wanted to say thank you guys so much for the kind words. I did get COVID last week, so thank you guys for the kind words, the concern, the care packages. As you can see here, my voice still is a little mucusy, but hopefully we can work through that. It might actually sound better. Might actually sound better than it normally does. But thank you guys again for all the care and concern. And despite getting COVID from it, I actually did have a really nice time at PaganaCon. That's Minnesota's big pagan convention that happens every year. It was in Plymouth this year. Thank you to the people who put that on. It was a great event. I actually got to meet Prudence Priest for the second year in a row. If you guys don't know Prudence was the steer of the Troth back in the 90s. So it was it's always fun to bump into her and pick her brain about what goes on. So without further ado, thank you guys very much. And we're going to get into our topic with Piper, our wonderful public relations director of the Troth, and just who actually just our auntie. Let's be real. Who just is our auntie, and here to talk about all the different ways that we can show up for people in our lives as a religious community. Piper, how are you doing this evening?
Good. This is a very busy time for me as far as kids events, because I've been doing Kids Ostara now for 3 weeks at like 3 different spaces. So yeah, but planning for kids is very much different than planning for adults.
Yeah, and Piper, why is that? Why is that you're doing all these different events for Ostara? Why so many back to back?
Because part of it is the way the organizations that I belong to, both the Troth and my local Unitarian church, they have Ostara. The Unitarian church has decided to have Ostara during their Easter service. So the Ostara service is for the kids and the Easter service is for the adults. And it's this is like the second year we're doing it. It works out really well, although it does make a really long day for me. And then as a covenant of Unitarian Universalist pagans, we did Ostara a couple weeks ago. And then as the Troth, we did Ostara like in the middle there. So just trying to hit all the places and spaces where people are interested. And Ostara is a big kid holiday, right? You get to dye eggs, you get to hunt eggs. You get to talk about springtime and how that manifests, and yeah, kids love that stuff.
It's a very youth-oriented holiday.
Yeah.
I find, like, in both the symbolism of the holiday, in like rabbits and lambs,
Yeah.
being very prevalent, new growth, new life. So it is a kind of a youth centric holiday season. So there's a lot to do for kids, and I think that's really cool. I am now hosting my own Stigerblot on the
Nice.
5th.
Okay.
So to close out the summer night season. So for those of you who don't follow the one holy, perfect, universal, apostolic troth calendar, you'll notice that this period that we're in right now is called summer nights. Summer nights is a holy tide of in which many holidays could happen, but usually it will start with Ostara and end with Stigerblot.
Yeah.
So that bookended by those two events.
Right.
And yes.
Yeah. And it's a fun, and traditions can be local, right? Like a lot of the traditions that people are listening for are like the first robin, right? That's when spring happens. Or when the peepers start making noise, that's when spring happens. So there's a lot of local land spirit work that can happen during this period of time too, because all that stuff is waking up as well.
Yes, and for Minnesotans, as we well know, spring doesn't really happen until May, and then it only lasts like 2 weeks, and then it is summer.
Yes.
So I feel for people whose holidays might be who don't necessarily get the nice smooth transitions from one season to another season.
Yeah.
But certainly here we roll with it. Basically, for Minnesotans, we just have to say, okay,
it's springtime.
It's springtime now, and then we'll have the spring snowstorm. It won't be a winter snowstorm; it'll be a spring snowstorm this time. They're distinctly different. One is much crueler.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, yes. I feel so sorry for people that moved to Colorado because we have a very similar thing, right? Spring is about 3 weeks, and then it goes straight into summer. But they come here expecting to be able to like put in seedlings around March or April. And we always wait till after Mother's Day because we never know if we're going to get another snowstorm or another frost or anything like that. So,
yes.
Yeah.
100%. That's part of why, and part of the impetus for this was this event coming up on April 5th, because we are going to have kids there. We're doing our Seagull Boat at the Unitarian Universalist Church in St. Paul, and we are going to be. It is a kid friendly event, and we want to know what we can do to actually have events that are really good for kids, and how we have an overall community that's good and supportive for kids. So, Piper, maybe you can help answer a question for me.
Yeah, sure.
Does it feel to you a little bit sometimes like paganism doesn't really have a heck of a lot for kids? It feels sometimes like paganism kind of goes, look, religion is something for adults. It's an adult decision that adults make. You are not ready for that decision yet. Therefore, you are not ready to be religious yet. And they kind of keep kids at a distance from whatever it is that we're doing. That's the general feeling that I get. I don't know, Piper, you've seen this too, and what do you feel?
I feel like that is actually very true. And part of the reason that is true is because for many of us, the conversion process was very traumatic, right? And it made us break with our families. So, and actually, in getting to know yourself as a pagan and as a person, you also look through the sort of generational trauma that's happening in your family, and you try to stop it. Some people choose to do that by not having children at all, right? I think it's a legitimate choice, because if you're going to have kids, you really should want them, right? And also, some people decide to have children, but to keep them from being indoctrinated by anyone until they turn 18. And then they can choose that themselves. the problem that we get from that is that if we are, as heathens, if we are really truly living into what we believe, this is a lifestyle. It is not a we go on a day of the week and we ignore it the rest of the week, right? This is a lifestyle. This is something we do every day. Most of us have some sort of ritual practice or prayer every day, and our kids see that, right? Our kids watch us do that. Our kids ask us questions about the world, right? About other people in the world. And the answers we give them are very much grounded in what we believe. So they're already getting what we believe. The problem is, of course, we really don't want them to feel like we felt when we converted, right? So we don't really make kids programming. We don't really make kids books. We don't really make kids, and I actually, when my adult was coming up as a child, I had to use Wiccan, and Starhawk wrote a book called Circle Round way back in the ages, right? And to modify that for heathenry, right? To modify those rituals, to modify those things for kids programming, for kids. But, and also a lot of us, because of both economics and trying to deal with generational trauma, we choose not to have children. And, you were saying you are the only person in your space that has a child, right? We have one person with a child in our kindred, and they can't bring their child to things because of custody issues. And that's been a problem since the beginning of kids and paganism, right? That was a really common way to get your kids taken away in the 90s.
Yes. It's still a fear to this day.
It's still a fear.
I do talk to people, as out as I am as being pagan, I'm very public about it.
Right.
I'm not a public figure by any means, but when I am in public dealing with like in my job or in my volunteer work, it is very well known that I'm pagan, and people look and go, well, that's scary because you could get your kids taken away. People could take your kids away from you. And I didn't grow up with that scare, but I know people, Gen X and older, definitely have that fear where either it happened to them or they heard about it happening to somebody else, where it was either a very bad divorce, and one of the partners decided to use the paganism as a way to get custody, and they could, and it's become lore in our community that you don't come out of that broom closet or they'll take your kids away.
Yes, that is. I was very lucky. My partner was also pagan, so there wasn't a problem with that. But yes, we had, back in Montana in the 90s, we had someone in our kindred who was in a custody dispute, and that was a writ come out from the judge that says, yes, you can have your daughter as long as she never participates in whatever this is. Right. So yeah, it probably didn't happen as much as people think it did, but it did happen to some people enough so it frightened a lot of us.
Yes, and I also think that, given other kinds of stories that were told when we come into the pagan world, also the kind of narratives that we come with out of our families of origin, as you said, sometimes breaking from that family and faith of origin causes a lot of trauma and makes us feel rejected. so we feel like we have to bring the broom closet with us wherever we go, because it's dangerous and unsafe to be who we are.
Yeah,
which is it's sad, and I'm not gonna tell somebody that and I'm not gonna tell someone, well, no, you have to be out and proud and whatever. If you feel you can't be, that's part of your journey, right?
yes,
It's part of
right.
It's part of your, and I'm not going to ask people to do that.
Yeah.
But I do find it, this molds kind of nicely into this part of bringing kids into paganism and into what we do, is the stories we tell them. And part of the stories that we tell them is what we do at holidays.
Yes.
One of the things that you and I have talked about, that I've talked about at length with other people in the Troth, is that the thing that we don't have, that other religions all seem to have, is they have a coherent narrative as to why they celebrate their holidays.
Yes.
They have, Easter is coming up.
Mm-hmm.
If you were raised Christian, you know the story of Easter. You know why you're celebrating Easter. And look, and I'm not going to get into historical fact. I'm not going to debate anything with anyone on this. I'm just telling you, this is the story they tell. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
The story is, on this particular day, this was the last week of Jesus's life. And then you have all these events that lead up to the crucifixion on Good Friday. And then you have the resurrection at Easter on Sunday. We don't have anything like that. We have what we have is more of the how would I put this? We have more of like the academics who look at what people did and try and figure out why they did it without constructing a story. And we even see this, even look back at our Troth, volume 3. All the resources there are about agriculture. Everything is about agriculture, the change in the seasons, a lot of things having to do with starvation, good harvests, fertility. This is all stuff that isn't exactly the story, because we don't have the story. It's the story the academic tells to try and figure out in their own mind, why might these people have done this? Why might they have had a holiday around this time? And thus far, for pagans, the only thing that I've seen for us is just building off this academic stuff, building off of the stuff saying, oh, it's a holiday of fertility.
Yeah.
Which is hard for me to connect to, honestly. It's hard for me to connect to, and it's hard for me to, like, I don't know about you guys out there, but I am not super comfortable sitting there and telling my 4-year-old about fertility.
That's a real weird conversation at 4.
Like,
yeah.
Yes, this holiday is about fertility and heteronormativity.
Yeah, and heteronormativity.
Yeah,
yes.
Right. And it's at this point that I always feel like I think we're at a bit of a disadvantage too, when it comes to kids. And I know I'm throwing a lot out there, but to respond to, but I feel like we're at a disadvantage, especially to folkish heathens, because of their insistence and their centralization of children as the summum bonum, right?
Yes.
The greatest children are, and I should say white children specifically, for them are the summum bonum. That is the greatest good. Yeah. That is the sacred thing. That is the thing you are supposed to do, is to make children.
That is children. Being a good heathen. That is what you're doing. Yeah.
That is your job. Like that is your job. It is in their credo. It is not, as far as I can tell, in our credo as inclusive heathens, to have kids or to celebrate kids, or to make our events and holidays and stories understandable to kids and to welcome them into our faith. We don't have that. And so I wonder, Piper, what can we do?
Well, okay, so I guess
I threw a lot at you. So now solve paganism for me, please.
Solve paganism. Okay. 1, 2, 3. No. I think we have to look at our motivation as to why we're doing it, right? We don't live an agricultural life. Okay. Ostaria and Yule are beautiful holidays. They are my favorites. I love them so much. And part of that is because when I did them for years and years and years, they were always very kid oriented because I had a kiddo. The other people I was practicing with had a few kiddos. So we had like 5 or 6 kids, right? This was a long time ago back in Wisconsin. Anyway,
They had lots of kids back then in Wisconsin.
yeah, back in Wisconsin. Well, because we were trying to build, and it's one of the things that, you know, we try to build an alternative support system for ourselves when we have kids, right? Because that used to be, if you were in a bad spot, you would ask your family for help. But if your conversion was traumatic, you don't have anyone to ask. So you try to build support networks, whether that is, you know, with your local UUs, whether that is with your local kindred, whether that is with the troth, however you choose to do that, right? And even science fiction conventions, because I've planned these, have a kids track of things for kids to do, right? These are just a bunch of like, you know, the anime convention they have here is one of the children's planning that I've done. And, you know, even these people have children that they sort of want to have, teach, learn, or play the entire time, right? While they're learning, doing stuff. And that's the way a lot of religions deal with that, is they have a kids track and they have an adult track.
Yes.
And one of the things that I thought of at the Troth with this last time, because we did have a few kids that came, was wouldn't it be cool if we had a kids track for them, right?
Yeah.
Cool things they could learn about, stories they could do. But we would have to rewrite the stories that we have for today.
Yes.
And I don't think... Well, actually, let me rephrase that. I don't know if our friends and neighbors, the people that we practice with, would be okay with that, right? Because there is a very much, if you tell a story, you have to have 3 or 4 references as to where it came from and what you did with it and all of that to be taken seriously.
Yes.
And when you're doing that with kids, that's boring, right?
Yes. Yes.
Kids want to dye eggs and throw them in the air and
yes.
You know, hunt for things, and they want to hear cool stories.
100%. And I would say that what you're saying now brings me back to the things the task in front of us, I think, is more monumental than people understand.
Yeah.
It's not just about giving kids activities to do at your next bloat to keep them distracted while the adults participate in the real thing. Right?
No, it's giving them a simplified real thing.
Yes. And it means that we have to understand for ourselves what the real thing is.
Yes.
And that's where I find the first problem. So if we're gonna, man, I wish I had a transition for this. Problem one, and the thing that we need to come at this from is running it back to before the activity, before the story, before any of that. What does this mean to me? What does this mean to us? And if the story I'm telling myself is the very academic, agricultural, very dry story, I don't feel that in a way that I would be able to tell that to someone else and make them feel that too.
Right.
That's not an emotion. That's not and it doesn't describe. And I'm not going to say this just for like marketing purposes. This is like, it's because it's not honest. It's not how I feel about Yule. I don't care about the change in seasons.
Right.
I don't care about the phases of the sun and the phases of the moon. I know some people do. I know some people care very much about what the moon
Yes.
is doing. For me, it's a timing device. Oh, look, it looks like this. That means it
Right.
must be this time of the month. Okay. Easy peasy. I don't get this kind of connection. And I don't mean to criticize people that do, but it doesn't make the story for me. What
Right.
I connect to is things like at Yule, the feeling of care and the feeling of warmth and kindness that we get from sharing hospitality with one another in hard conditions, in hard times, and the promise that we make to each other to care for one another, constantly being renewed year after year. That to me
Right.
is the core of that season. The preservation of that light of kindness and human heartedness within you throughout the dark of the winter.
Right.
That that to
Right.
me is like an emotional core. So running everything back to that and saying, okay, that's what this holiday, this lesson, this moment means to me.
Mm-hmm.
Now, second part, what is the coherent story that I can come up with from this core that I've got, from this core, this feeling, this emotion, this value that I have? What's the coherent story that I can tell that's going to grab interest? Because kids don't, as you pointed out, kids don't care about factual narratives.
Mm-hmm.
They don't care about what was it? They don't care about necessarily like if it lines up with history.
Right.
I hate
If
to
you
tell you
have
this,
all
guys.
the footnotes.
Yeah, kids do not care about historical accuracy either. I'm sorry, guys.
And they love one of the things that we did for years and years and years was we would have the youngest child, we'd turn off all the lights for Yule, and we talk about the dark, and we talk about why the dark was important, right? Why bears hibernate in the dark, smaller animals hibernate in the dark. It's so that we can rest for the light. And then you have the youngest child in the house turn all the lights back on, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just like, okay, so this promise thing, right? And that's the story that we would tell with that. And kids loved that. It wasn't elaborate, it wasn't detailed, it certainly wasn't poetic, but it was something they responded to, right? It made sense to them. Yes. And I think that is, those are the stories that we sort of have to collect. Stories that people tell their children. We have a continental Germanic person who tells their child, who tells their child wonderful stories about, the values and the hero stories and all of those things, right? And I don't know what those stories are, but I would be interested to find out, right?
He actually read us one
on
a
cool.
Previous episode. So he gave us a brief overview of one of his short little fables that he's done.
Right. And you were doing those with your child, little fables about winter and the ending of winter. Those are the things that I would love to collect as sort of a parent's or parent guardian friend of sourced stories that work, right?
Yes.
These are stories that work with our children. We know they do, right?
Yes. And there's activities that work with kids too. I mean, if you can take, so I'll give you an example. Yule this past year, we were working with a couple of different groups, and one of the groups run by a wonderful friends of mine, Garrett and Stacy Gronwald, had a tradition at Yule that they really insisted on, which was the running of the Mari Lud, which is the ghost horse, the skeleton horse,
the death horse.
Cool. So yeah, cool. when I was telling my wife, yeah, they want to do a running of the Merry Lude, and it comes and tries to drink your beer, and you have to sing to make it go away. And I'm showing my wife pictures of it, and her she's like, you're gonna do this with our child being there. You're gonna bust out this
horse skull
on a stick, run around with it. You know, she's going to be terrified. And I had to think, like, okay, why are we doing this? You know, what's the point?
What's our motivation?
What's our motivation here? What's the thing that we want to teach people about the Mari Lwyd? What's the thing we want kids to come away with? Because there would be other kids there, ostensibly around her age. So I didn't want to scare them either. So I'm like, okay, number one, what's one great way to make kids not afraid of something? Have it drop candy. I don't care what it is. If it spews candy, it can't be that bad.
Right.
So we figured we would have the Mari Lwyd come in. I have these sacks of candy strapped to me, and instead of hitting me like a piñata or something, the kids would sing at me, and I would drop the candy.
Nice.
So I would come towards the beer, and the kids would run up, and they'd sing, and I'd drop candy as I kind of neighed. So it was me. I'm sorry to spoil this for you, sweetheart. It was me. It was me all along.
That's awesome, though. That is really cool. I like that very much.
So we wanted to get this idea of working together, because the kids would come together and sing, and also that it's not so scary. It's just thirsty.
Right.
It's just a thirsty skull horse, and it's full of candy. And my daughter to this day is she's not afraid of stuff like this she's not even afraid of the Krampus at this point. Like she thinks that they are wonderful. She loves the Krampus. She asks where she could see more Krampuses, because when we met them, they were very friendly to her and very nice to her. So you can make a kid's world really magical, even with kind of scary looking creatures, just depending on how they behave. And it's so wonderful about kids. One of the wonderful things about kids is, even if something's scary, if it produces something nice, they actually are kind of okay with it. They're very non-judgmental.
Yes, actually, in my experience, kids love monsters. Yes. They really, really do. They're their favorite thing. They love them so much. They want to give them kisses and hugs and that sort of thing.
It depends entirely on, and I would say entirely on behavior, not on the story you tell them, on the framing you give them around the experience. Like if you are making it seem like, if you're very excited about seeing a Krampus, they'll be excited about seeing a Krampus. Yes. Right? The frame you put around it is the frame they're gonna look at it through. So deciding way back at the beginning, what is it that I'm trying to position here? What's the story I'm telling with either the actual story I'm verbally telling them, or the event that I'm about to have, or the activity that I'm about to do? What is it that I'm trying to get? And then we get to part two, whoosh, which is the framing.
Yes.
So from the deciding what you're going to do, how are you going to frame that in a way that's going to impart that to them in a way that's not that's going to make them feel included and happy, and in a way that they're going to get it. And it's different than the way you would frame something to an adult.
Yes, it is different the way you would frame something to adult. One of my favorite land spirit activities to do with children is to talk to them about, how animals don't get as much food in the winter. So, they make as we're having this conversation, right, as we're talking about it and we're talking about the different animals and all that other stuff, they have one of those big pine cones that they're sort of making into a seed thing to hang when we're done. As we talk about the environment, as we talk about, the winter, as we talk about how season changes, all of those things. Or one of the other things we do for Earth Day is we take kids out to pick up trash, right? Because Earth Day, this is our day to honor the earth and the things that live here besides us. And this is our mess collectively, not maybe individually, but collectively, this is our mess. Therefore, we're going to spend this day cleaning it, right? Those sorts of, kids love activities, and if it's nice outside, and it usually is here in April, taking them outside is fabulous because then they get to interact with the environment. Giving them openings to ask questions dependent on their age, right? As to sort of what's going on in the nature they're in, right? Like buds for things or pine beetle infestation. There was a whole year we spent talking about pine beetle infestation because it was a problem where we were picking up trash, that sort of thing, right? So getting them involved in a way that's not just their brains, but their bodies too, right? Their emotions also. Because those are more value conversations. Those are more value lessons than they are necessarily stories. But we have mythological stories that could easily be adapted to those.
Yeah, you could tell your kids. You could tell your kids, if you don't pick up trash on Earth Day, Jormungandr's going to eat you.
Yes, exactly.
A giant snake is going to pop out of the ocean and eat all of us.
Yes.
You could do that. Don't necessarily do that.
This is not advised. Please don't do that.
No,
but
don't do
but also just sort of because part of our stories is reflection of our values, and the stories we tell about that, the good stories. And I find that Swedish folklore is actually a little bit better about that than like the Eddas. Stories of like trolls and stuff are a little bit easier for kids to understand. There was one year we did a chase the environmentally sick troll away by picking up as much plastic as you can, I mean, those sorts of things. So yeah, what your frame depends on your audience partially, and it depends on what value you want to highlight.
Yeah.
Right.
And after you've gotten that frame, that's when you start building a narrative, a story, a activity, something that makes, and I'll say this is where this is where a lot of people get tripped up. So this is part 3.
Yep.
Dun, 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 dun. 3. When you're trying to include kids in what you're doing and what your community's doing, that story doesn't have to be true. It true in the sense where it's like it doesn't have to be factually correct.
Right.
It doesn't have to be historically accurate. It doesn't have to be any of those things. It only has to be, I would say, 2 things. 1, internally coherent. So action, any actions you do, any activity, any part of a game, the rules all have to make sense with regards to one another, right? The rules of the game, the rules of the activity, the action of the story all has to make sense within itself. And 2, it has to, what was I going to say about it? There's 2 parts to it. The second part's even more important. Hold on. The first part is that it has to be internally consistent, coherent, and I think that's actually it. It just has to be internally coherent.
And I would add, it also has to be interesting to children.
Oh, yes. It can't be boring.
It can't be boring.
There you go. I forgot that it can be boring.
The thing is, we have so many cool stories, right?
Yes.
It doesn't have to be boring.
No.
even when it's necessarily a sad story, right? Because I've told the story of like Frigga going to all the things to say, please don't harm my son, and then going back to going back and say, please, cry for my son. And kids think that story is very sad because they connect it to their moms, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, oh my gosh, this is what motherhood becomes. This is an example of motherhood. And then there's really good values in that particular story for a certain points, certain things that you're trying to teach kids. But it definitely has to be an interesting story. It cannot be boring. And it shouldn't probably be very long. Even if you have older kids, it shouldn't be probably more than 10 minutes long.
Yeah.
I mean,
and I actually I'm glad you brought up the Balder story, because the thing about it doesn't have to be true, because as we know, that version you're telling is the not true one,
right?
Whereas the true one is the Saxo one,
right?
As we know, right. Okay,
as we know, because you're cool. As we know, Saxo is the only one that tells the truth.
Saxo is the actual only true version of the Balder story, as has been confirmed by science.
Yes, it's been confirmed.
But no, it doesn't have to be true, but it has to, and it also doesn't have to be happy.
No,
right?
It doesn't.
You have to give kids permission and the safety to be sad. That's part of what good stories do, is it gives us the safety of being able to experience an emotion without having to face necessarily the other kinds of consequences that would go along with it. Like, I don't actually have to lose a child,
right,
in order to feel that emotion of someone else, hearing a story of someone else losing and empathizing with them. One of the fantastic things that human beings can do is that we can imagine ourselves as someone else going through something and feel that emotion. So it's absolutely okay if part of your story is sad. Guys, one of the stories that kids get told around this time of year is actually pretty freaking sad. Right about now. Actually, today is a very sad day.
Yeah, today is a very sad day.
In particular, right? Like today, this guy, who's this guy's story is where this part of the story is where he gets brutally murdered.
Yeah,
like brutally tortured and killed. Today. So kids grow up with this story, and most of us don't think anything of it. Most of us think that's
it's a normal part of society. Yeah,
it's a normal part of life that kids get to experience fear and sadness and anger throughout this retelling of this story. So yeah, if you're telling your kids stories, they've got to be interesting. They don't have to be happy. They just have to be interesting, and they have to be coherent. And activities that you do, not just do stories have to be coherent, but activities you do have to
connect to the story.
Connect to
the story somehow.
Yes, connect to the story, and they also have to be. I find that consistent application of, if it's a game, consistent rules, and it can't be boring.
Yeah.
Right. That's the fun part. So we are now building towards making activities for kids by starting with what is it we're trying to teach, picking a frame to teach that in, and then starting to build that narrative and story through an activity or through an actual verbal story for kids. And that's part of how we make our faith more kid friendly, because as of right now,
multi-generational.
Multi-generational. There you go.
Because we don't, at this point, we have a really hard time with that sort of jump generationally. I mean, we have some people in the community raising their children heathen, some people in the community that went out of their way not to raise their children heathen. And now we've got third generation people out there who's, with little kids who need more stuff, right? They just need more stuff to help them build family traditions, tell interesting stories, and really fall in love again with their faith, right?
Yes.
I mean, that's really what we're doing.
Yes, and here's part of it for me, is that so much of saying like, well, we want to have kid-friendly spaces, we want to have multi-generational friendly spaces, is actually the parents who are trying to teach their kids end up having, like I did, having a crisis of faith because they don't know what it is that they're supposed to teach their kids, because they don't know what it is they believe.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, they don't know.
Right.
So you're walking around, you've been heathening pretty hard for the last 10 years, 15 years, hitting the books, reading all the sources, reading Saxo 6 times, the minimum amount.
Right.
In the original Latin. And you've been arguing on TikTok, you've been owning fools like just left and right. And yet, when it comes to telling your kids about what you believe or trying to tell them a story about your faith, you're stuck with trying to read them the Eddas and them just looking at you going, why did they just kill that person? Like,
yeah.
Like,
yeah.
Why is he getting peed on? Like, you know.
Why is he threatening that lady?
What's Loki saying about Freya and Freya? Like,
exactly. Never mind. Never mind.
You're just stuck, and part of it, I think, part of the reason why people get stuck, either doing nothing or reading them incredibly inappropriate stories, is because we don't know what we're supposed to be doing or what we're supposed to be teaching, because we don't quite know what we believe ourselves. Right. And some of this is actually teaching parents what they believe.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. And also it depends on what angle you're coming at it from. Like when we had a lot of kiddos in Wisconsin, there was a book about environmental activities with your kids, right? And this is sort of the value it teaches, right? So we take that book, match it to the season, try to come up with a story from the Eddas that matched that particular thing, and go with it, right? And some of those are very successful and some of those are horrifying failures, but
you have to try.
Right, we had to try, because they want to know why we're making the choices we make. Every child wants to know why the grown-ups around them are making the choices they make. And if your child is growing up in a heathen environment, even if they're the only child, they're watching a whole bunch of adults react to things differently than their friends' adults.
Yes.
And they want to know why.
And this is not just about, and I want like, the part of this is not like, I'm not telling people how to parent, because this isn't directed necessarily just at parents. This is directed at you out there in heathen land who are trying to form multi-generational communities, and probably finding that it's rather difficult to do. People sometimes will ask, like, can I bring my kids to this thing? And you
I get
maybe
that
not
question
have
a lot.
You may not have considered that question.
And the thing is, because of my background and because I've been doing this for a while, I do always take that into account. If somebody says, is this kid friendly? I'm like, yeah, I can make it that way. Just a tweak and a wiggle, and we can make that way. And also, I also teach faith exploration at Jefferson Unitarian Church. I teach 6th graders about other faiths. And I get a background check every year. Every year is a background check. I think if we're going to do programming on a larger basis, we have to think about things like that. Unfortunately,
Yeah.
We have a lot of pagan festivals in Colorado, and every year we have a scandal because someone has done something inappropriate with either an adult or a child, depending. So yes, we want to come up with fun, cool things. And we also want to, those of us that do not currently have kids in the system, we want to be safe people so that those parents can say, I need to put this down for about 5 minutes. Please, please.
Yes.
But
think about Piper, and I invite people who are listening or watching now to invite you guys to think about the kind of community we would be building if we had that kind of safety, had that kind of safety in mind for kids, and that people actually wanted to bring their kids to. Like, what a wonderful compliment it is to what you've built in your community when parents say, oh, I cannot wait to come back to, this Yule event. My kids had so much fun. I hope you're doing it again. Are you doing it again?
Yeah.
That parents feel like they can trust this community with their children, and not just trust them at that basic level of safety, right? But also can feel that my kid's going to go here and is going to learn something that I want them to learn.
Yes.
That I might not necessarily be able to teach them, and that they're going to have a good experience of faith early on in life, a happy experience of faith early in their lives.
Yes.
What a compliment to the community you've built. That when people can genuinely feel like this is a good place to bring my kids.
Yeah. We have a winter solstice service like that actually here.
Yeah.
This year was the third year, and it's the favorite of parents to bring their kids. Right. We tell stories about grandmother winter. We made it up. We totally made it up whole cloth. And yet it gets to talk about things like, where does snow come from? And, and her geese dropping feathers. And, we got to do some puppet stuff with geese. And then the kids got to go make like little ornaments with geese on them. I mean, that was the story. And then they get to set a wreath with intentions on fire, and kids love fire. But of
safety
course,
first, safety first.
But we have safety first, we have that, cared for and blocked off, but it's a place where people feel like they can bring their kids, and their kids will learn what they want them to learn, and they can participate together in a space that they didn't have to plan, right? They didn't have to read it. They didn't have to do it by themselves. They can bring their kids and drop them off. And I spent most of Ostara, the Cups Ostara this year, holding a baby. I was doing a ritual holding a baby.
And that's part of what community means. Like part of what community means is helping to take care of kids that aren't like biologically yours. Like they're not, they're and you get to feel like we were talking about the auntie, the uncle. So for those of you out there who don't have kids, you don't plan on having kids, you don't intend on having kids, you can still be that person who shows up and plays a very big role in a child's life, even if you never want to have kids of your own. And actually, it's kind of great that way, because then the parents have to deal with like the diaper changing and the
messy parts, and you get to have cool stories and do fun stuff, and like you get
to be story uncle, you get to be auntie, you get to be auntie goose
with all the you get to be auntie goose with all the cookies, right? With all the gluten-free cookies, because my wife can't eat gluten. So, but you get to and you give parents both a break and support, right? Because you're
Yes.
supporting their decisions, you're supporting what they want for their kids. You're supporting that because you all belong to the same or a similar location and or faith, right?
Yes.
At least, or practice, that you're all practicing together with this particular thing in mind. And that is, the beauty of heathenry, whether it's Anglo-Saxon heathenry or continental Germanic or Norse, right? There's that really strong community care of children.
Yeah.
And yeah.
And I want to emphasize this too. Like my friend, friend of the show, friend to all, Josh Heath. He and I were talking earlier before today, and one of the things that I brought up that I want to tie in here is that this notion of helping people with their kids, helping people, helping kids understand this faith, building a space that is safe for kids and welcoming to multi-generation heathens. This is not like epic. This is not the kind of thing that Amon Amarth sings about. It is not the kind of thing that you hear in like Viking metal songs.
Yes.
And I feel like that is partly why you don't see a lot of these initiatives happening, is because I feel like there's a bill of goods that people have been sold about what they're supposed to do in heathenry.
Right.
And it ain't changing nappies.
Right. But I would also point out that being a mentor to a child, whether that's a child as part of your kindred or is someone or friends or, however that relationship is, can save children's lives.
Yes.
And especially queer children, right?
Yes.
So I've been out in that community for also a very long time. And this week, especially, I've had several people come back to me and say, if you hadn't been there for me 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I would have killed myself by now. Right. Yeah. So that sort of, there can be someone in your community when you're having frustrations with your child and you don't know how to reach them that might be able to. Right. That might actually understand whatever it is that they have going on in their hearts. And we can accept that as part of a community, as we can accept our children as part of a community responsibility rather than an individual one. And I think that would be a really good place for us to move into anyway. But because I know it sounds very trite, but the children really are our future. And also, right, what we teach them about how to live in the future is what they'll carry with them. And we don't actually know what they remember. It's not until they become adults.
That is the freakiest thing. Yes.
It really is. And I had someone come to me last week who I had said, like, I don't remember, it was like an off phrase about, enduring when things hurt, that this person had really taken to heart and kept next to them so that they could get through really hard times. And I was like, oh, well, thanks. And, and I, when I was done talking to them, I was like, I don't even remember doing that.
Yeah. It's very strange, the things that people remember. And you can have an impact on someone's life, even in ways that you might not think it's that epic. You're not swinging a battle axe over your head or something like that, but you're having major impact on somebody through the words you say, through the actions you do. And if you are, it's a cat.
Sorry, this is Bluetopia Jones. Hello, Bluetopia Jones.
Hello, Bluetopia.
Bluetopia Jones. Yes,
my wife. Bluetopia Jones.
Anyway, yes, it has a lot to do with what parents shouldn't be on the hook for everything. That is such a lonely and hard place to be. We
Yes.
as a community should be, and there are some people that don't like children. There are some people that have trauma around not being able to have children. So, okay, they don't have to, it doesn't have to be everyone, but we as a community should at least have some of us that step forward and say, I want to help you because I know this job is hard.
Yes. Yes. It is 100% yes. A community that's unable to do that is not going to have. You're not going to have multi-generational people coming in. They're just going to leave. It's sad, and I'm going to go back to the white nationalist stuff. We've had people leave the inclusive community for the white nationalist community specifically because of kids, because they believed in this promise that we'll help you take care of your kids.
Yes.
Like we will do that. Everyone else, leave your kid, gross kids, leave them at home. Like we're doing crazy stuff. Like we're going to be throwing things at each other. I don't know. We're going to get wild. Leave the kids at home. Like this isn't for them. Whereas you have this other part of, and I even say of the pagan community in general, you have this other part of this pagan adjacent group that's saying, no, bring them. In fact, make more of them. Yes. Can you have more? Is there any way you can have more?
Yes, and we have homeschooling resources for them. We have mythological resources for them. We have activities for them to do, and we care about you and them together. And the thing is, they're not lying. It's just
but it also doesn't matter how good those resources are, right? Like I've seen them; they're not great.
Not great.
They're not good, and it's not something that I would say like replaces an actual education. But what matters is the message, right? The message is we care about this. And as far as I've seen from the rest of the pagan community, we are having a very hard time showing that same care across the board.
Yeah.
Right?
We are.
We do not have children's books. We do not have any children's programming, or at least not highly promoted children's programming.
Right.
We don't because... And it's not and I'm going to say this, it's not out of maliciousness.
No,
guys, it's not because we're malicious. It's not because, anybody hates kids. It's because of the unique circumstances of paganism being like, this is like religion is a decision you make when you're an adult.
Yes. Because I didn't get to make that decision. My children will have that decision.
Yes, my choice was taken away from me when I was a kid, and I want to make sure that my kids have that. So I will not indoctrinate them into my faith. Right? Yep. They make a conscious decision not to do it.
Yep.
So it has nothing. It's not because people don't like kids. It's purely because the moral imperative that people feel on the one hand in most of the pagan community is different than how they feel in like the white nationalist community.
Right. Exactly.
Their moral imperative is entirely different.
Yes.
Than the pagan one, than the actual pagan one. Most pagans would say, I at least this is my feeling, is that again, religion is something for adults. It is an adult decision that adults make, and I will not take that away from take that free choice away from my child.
Right. Right. And of course, the biggest problem with that is if you have a child that is different or neurodiverse or rebelling against they end up in white nationalist spaces, or they end up in evangelical Christian spaces because those have strict rules. They are accepted without questions or anything like that. I mean, being inclusive means you have to ask a lot of questions, right? Yeah. So when you're talking about kids events, for example, you have to make sure you have a quiet space for neurodivergent children when they get overwhelmed. You have to have it in a space for kids with mobility issues can move. You have to
Yes.
have it where all of those things, right? White nationalists don't care about any of that stuff. They
No,
don't. They don't have
they
to.
don't, yeah, they don't have to.
Yeah.
And it does make it does mean that our work is cut out for us.
Yeah.
But I think that if we have to start by actually caring, by saying that this matters, that it matters to us that multi-generational heathens should be part of our community, and we need to make space for them, and it is important for us to make space for them. It's important for us to make space for you. It's important for us to make space for your kids too, because if you're a parent, that is, your kid is part of the package. My daughter is a part of a part of me wherever I go. She is coming with me. I don't always get the luxury of saying, here, honey, could you look after her while I go pick up tofu? No,
right.
No,
exactly.
She is coming to get the tofu with me.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh boy, I have been
Yeah.
on a vegan kick. I've been on a vegan fast for all of the last month. It's getting to
Oh,
me.
okay.
Ugh,
Wow.
tofu. So much tofu.
So much tofu. Yes, I've done that as well. That was real rough, and that's when I learned that probably wouldn't work for me. But I do know people that it works for. So
yeah. Well, so for me, I do the Lenten fast, so it's no meat,
Oh, nice.
no alcohol, it's devotional for me for Njord.
Nice.
So that's for me. Sometimes I'll have a fish fry.
Yeah. Okay.
Sometimes.
All right.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
But that's also something my daughter notices. My behavior changes around this time of year, and I get to tell her why I do that. Someday. She doesn't quite understand why I'm not eating meat. But she also doesn't quite understand. She also doesn't quite understand the difference between meat and not meat.
Oh,
right?
Okay.
There's
yeah.
the moral question of eating animals hasn't occurred to her.
Right.
She hasn't quite made the connection between the animal chicken and the food chicken.
Okay. Yeah.
So
that's a fun realization. You'll have fun with that.
If she wants to go vegan, I'm ready.
Yeah. And she might have that phase. For sure. A lot of young people do now and are doing it more now. Right.
Yeah.
That's actually something we have to keep into account when we're doing events, because most events have food, right? Do we have vegan options that aren't just a bowl of salad? Right? Because it's not like they haven't eaten that a million times.
And do we have, but I also like the story. This is important too. Important thing for food. Food tells a story too.
Yes.
Right? When we talk about having a ham, right? It's we got to have a ham. Why do heathens eat so much pork? Oh, because Freyr rides a boar.
Yep.
The boar, the boar is the animal that the Auntie feast upon. It's an actual pig. It's on the menu. It's on the holy menu. For other traditions, like lamb is just part of the story. For vegans, that's what I love. I love my vegan. But for vegans in heathenry, they don't get to have a food that's part of the story, unless we figure out how to make one a part of the story. Now, one of my friends who's very devoted priest goes on a full vegan fast before he does any ritual and eats only beans. Just beans and certain kinds of beans, because he sees beans as being particularly holy. And I'm well, that's cool. That's neat. That's beans made it into the. I just heard the ancient poem. I believe that was from, what was it? The Havamal? Beans, the magical fruit.
Yeah, I remember that person that have a ball.
Something. I can't remember the rest.
Something. Yeah.
But no, I mean, we finding ways to incorporate food traditions is another important way of being inclusive, not just to other parents, but also kids be getting into different kinds of diets these days, right? Like,
and
so
there's a lot of allergies too, right?
Yes.
There's a lot of food sensitivities and allergies. There are people that are on very specific diets. I remember looking at some of the comments about food for Trothmoot last year. There were actually a surprising amount of people that were like, no, I have a very special diet because of an illness or because of a set of things, right?
Yeah.
And again, that becomes part of event planning. That becomes part of a tradition. And, we should have, I have an old Sunset Scandinavian cookbook. It's old. And it has a bunch of like cabbage and cucumbers and dill and all of those like really yummy sorts of, I love all that stuff. Anyway, so but there aren't any stories that go with those recipes because those recipes are all more, Midwest Scandinavian. So
where food is something you punish yourself with to get to dessert, right?
Right,
like that's
exactly, because you have these amazing desserts and the food in the front.
You have like
sort
cream
of like
cake and all kinds of stuff, and you have all this stuff waiting for you. You just got to wolf down this rotten cabbage.
Right. But yeah, different food traditions. And the thing is, a lot of our heathens from different places, like Germany, I'm really bummed that I don't get to go to Frith Forge because I really wanted to see the Costa Rican in relationship with the environment.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. But hopefully I'll get to see it online. But that sort of what kind of food traditions do they have based in their faith, right? Versus the ones that we have, and hopefully they have some better recipes than some of us do. Anyway, at least spicier ones.
Just ham.
Yeah,
you can't go wrong with ham. All right, folks, we are just about at time.
Yep.
But I want to thank Piper for being here, for having so many great ideas, and for doing the work that she does to make a community, an inclusive community in Colorado. Just understanding that inclusive community also means a community that makes space for kids.
Yeah.
And really considers their experience as part of the responsibility of the community and part of the wonder of the event itself, right? Is making, I can't think of an event that would be fun for kids that would not also be fun for adults.
Right.
So throwing that out at you.
Yeah, for sure.
Piper, any parting words, any final thoughts to the audience this evening?
You are, as parents, those of you that are heathen parents out there, you're doing good work under difficult circumstances, especially nowadays. I've had some really heartbreaking conversations lately with people who actually do want to be parents that can't afford to in the current economy. So, and we want to find ways to help you. So if you can think of anything, by all means, let us know. If there's something you'd like to see for your kids, if there's programming or events or holidays, holy days, holy stories that you use, let us know, because hopefully we can be a community where we can build those supports and traditions together.
Yes, let's do that.
Let's do
So from all of us to all of you guys, thank you for joining us for All Thing Considered. We will see you next week at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And also do remember to register for Frith Forge. The in-person has closed, but there's still plenty of time to reserve your spot for the online portion, which will be broadcast to ticket holders. So we do appreciate you guys coming here, and please do tune into Frith Forge as well. Thank you guys so much. Have a wonderful night.